This is episode 70 of Changing the Face of Yoga, and I am interviewing Jivana Heyman, the creator and instigator behind Accessible Yoga. So let's listen.
I also have an opportunity for you. Harsha Yoga is offering an online course to teach you or expand your knowledge in the area of accessible yoga for pregnant women. And it is available now, and you can sign up at http://bit.ly/Harsha. And that's HERSHA, all caps. And if you put in this code when you are paying for the course, you will receive 15% off. So the code is CFOYHERSHA. Again, all caps. So that may be an opportunity for those of you that want to learn or to expand your knowledge about providing accessible yoga for pregnant women. Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is Changing the Face of Yoga, and my guest today is Jivana Heyman, who is the creator and founder, the person behind the popularity of accessible yoga. And he is a certified yoga therapist, an experienced yoga teacher at the 500 level, and the founder and director of Accessible Yoga. It's an international nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing access to the yoga teachings for people of all abilities and backgrounds. It offers 2 conferences a year, and which focus on community building and education, as well as a popular ambassador program, and offers trainings. Jivana is the co-owner of the Santa Barbara Yoga Center and an integral yoga minister. And he's been teaching for over 25 years. And he specializes in teaching yoga to people with disabilities. So welcome, Jivana. And is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Oh, hi. Thanks so much for having me. No, that pretty much sums it up all right there.
Okay, great. I'm glad we got it in. All right. I've been looking at your website and your Facebook, and this accessible yoga is a tremendously huge undertaking. I mean, you have, so many different things to offer. How did you get to that point where you thought this was something that was necessary to do, or something that you felt called to do?
Well, first, I just want to say I love the name of your podcast. That's why I was really excited to be here today, because I just think that's exactly what we're trying to do, and that's change the face of yoga. I think there's really a misunderstanding out there,
yes,
at least in the West, about what yoga is. So I think that's mainly where what compels me to do the work I do, is to just change the message, change the concept about what yoga is, and help people understand that accessible yoga, I mean, on the one hand, you could say we're kind of into advocating for inclusion, and I can tell you my story a little, because I am definitely a disability activist, but really I think it just gets to the core of what yoga is. And by nature, yoga is accessible. The essence of the practice is available to everyone.
True. I'm not doing it this year, but usually I teach seniors, and it's very hard sometimes for people to think that, older people to think that yoga that they can even do yoga. And so I'm definitely with you on this one. This is
yeah. Well, you had asked me, did you, I don't know if you want my history a little, I mean, how I got started, or
that's
is that
great.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a gay man, and I came out in the late 80s, and that was during the AIDS epidemic in New York, and then I moved to San Francisco, and just, was surrounded by my friends sick and dying at a very young age. So I was exposed to a lot of challenges early, but I found, yoga, I was using yoga for my own sanity. And actually my grandmother had taught me yoga when I was a child. So I kind of already had that in me. And then I started practicing again right after college, and it really helped me. And as I got more involved with yoga, I realized that I was an AIDS activist too. I was on the streets trying to speak up for the rights of people with AIDS. And, it just occurred to me that what I could also do is bring yoga to my community. So that's what I did. I mean, so once I became a yoga teacher, I immediately started sharing yoga with people with AIDS, HIV and AIDS, and with other disabilities as well. So it just expanded from there.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
And so as you expanded what you were offering, how did you get from there to this nonprofit organization, which is huge?
Well, it's been a long journey, about 25 years now, but I would say I was mostly inspired by many of my students who had disabilities themselves and really embraced yoga. And they showed me how yoga can be so transformative. I mean, even though many of them got sick and died, yoga is about peace of mind and being able to live in the world in a way that's peaceful. I mean, that's what I feel. So I just saw so many of my students just really gaining so much from yoga. And it was so clear to me that that's what yoga is about. I mean, yoga really is a practice of learning to work with the mind. I mean, we can use the body, but it's really about befriending yourself so that you can be at peace with yourself and be happy. I mean, I think that's what it really gets to, is being happy. So anyway, I saw my students doing that, and I was just compelled to support them and share more. I mean, it just felt like there was this big gap in the world where people who, there was yoga was happening, kind of this whole gym yoga thing was building, and it just felt like it was going, in my opinion, kind of going in the wrong direction. Rather than becoming more inclusive, it was becoming more exclusive. That was painful for me to see. And then, so my day job, I was really working on teaching, training yoga teachers. So I was managing yoga studios and training yoga teachers for integral yoga for almost 20 years. So I led, I don't even know how many 200-hour trainings. I mean, probably 50 200-hour teacher trainings.
Wow.
Over the course of 20 years. And what I found is that many of and I was teaching yoga for people with disabilities as well. I would go into hospitals and into the community. But I found that most of my students with disabilities wouldn't even consider coming to a teacher training. And that made me really sad, because I found that teacher training, I love teacher training, and I feel like that's where the essence of the practices are often shared. And I felt there was really a real lack of access that people with disabilities, or really anyone who doesn't feel comfortable in a traditional or like a modern yoga studio, they don't have access to really the core teachings of yoga. And that's really what inspired me to start Accessible Yoga under that name. Because, you know what I mean, in teacher training, you really get to explore yoga philosophy and theory and understand the full practice in a way that's hard to do in a yoga class.
Agreed.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I do.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever, maybe I have, but I don't think it's happened very often that I've actually had anybody talk about the Patanjali Sutras in a yoga class. But that's
right.
They're trying to get through. Something. I understand that, but I don't think I've ever talked about it, actually. Come to think of it.
Right. I know. Well, I have. I'm slightly obsessed with the sutras, so I do talk about them. But I just, because I'm trying to make that bridge, I feel like there's kind of this, I don't know what it is. It's almost like modern postural yoga it's a completely separate entity than what I think of as classical yoga, which stems from the sutras and the Gita. And I'm not quite sure where we're at. It feels like, I know there's a lot of interest. I mean, and I'm not trying to criticize, there's nothing wrong with asana practice, but I just feel like we need to go connect those two things. It feels like it's a more powerful practice when you do. And I know so many teachers do that. Yeah. So.
No, I agree. Powerful because of its many aspects. And if you just concentrate on one, you're just missing out on a lot, that things you could have so much more if you had some access to some other things. So we agree on that. That's easy. But so I just want to explore a little bit. What exactly is integral yoga?
Oh, it's a style of yoga. My teacher is Swami Satchidananda, and it's a Hatha yoga, classical school of yoga. Swami Satchidananda came from India in the late 60s and taught a lot in the US. So it's very popular here. It was, at least in the 60s and 70s. Now it's moved into more power and vinyasa classes these days. But, it's kind of the classical Hatha yoga tradition. And what's great about Swami Satchidananda and integral yoga is the clear teachings on yoga philosophy. He was, his translation of the Yoga Sutras is really great. It's very easy to understand, very accessible.
No, that's good, because they can be a little esoteric, I found.
Yeah. I mean, he did really inspire me in that way, because I saw how he took the teaching from India and was making it accessible to a Western audience.
Okay.
So I could understand how important it is to make the teaching of yoga work for your community and, in your time and place. There's a different language that we need to use. Yoga can be modernized in the way it's, communicated, in the way it's, expressed, even though the essence of it doesn't change. So.
Okay. So that's a nice segue, which is you talked about community. And I noticed that you have a real emphasis on that in accessible yoga, that you have ambassadors and conferences and all kinds of things to bring people together. And I think that's wonderful. But why is that so important to you?
Well, it's interesting. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying. I mean, I guess I can finish that story about how accessible yoga really started. So I would say about 10 years ago or so, I was trying to get some of my students with disabilities to take teacher training to become yoga teachers. Mm-hmm. I was encouraging them, and a few of them tried to take the regular class, but it was too intensive. The time and the schedule just didn't work for their body. And so I created accessible yoga as a 200-hour teacher training at first. So it was the idea was training yoga teachers who have disabilities themselves. And I saw also through that experience in teacher training is the importance of community. And that's part of why I love teacher training more than drop-in yoga classes. I like having a consistent group of people. Mm-hmm. And it's so healing, when we have community. I feel like that's the other thing that yoga can do, is really bring people together. And there's just so much isolation, and especially in the US here, I think, but I think it's quite dangerous for us. So I feel like community is a great way to come together. It makes us healthier, makes us happier. And that's what I wanted. So then actually, like a couple of years ago, I moved from the San Francisco Bay Area south to Southern California, which is quite far. And I really lost my community. And that's when the idea of a conference came to me, is because I was really struggling to find a community. And I realized that probably most yoga teachers are in the same boat as me, and that they don't have a community, especially teachers who are specialized in that they're, are doing the kind of service that I was doing, which is bringing yoga to people who don't necessarily have access. So it's one thing to teach in a studio. You probably have a community there. But my teaching was I would go all over the place. I would go teach in a hospital, and then a community center, and then another hospital, and then another, and it left me quite isolated, actually, because it was just me traveling around all the time and bringing yoga to people. And I didn't really have a support for myself. So that's how accessible yoga in its current form really started. We did a conference about 4 years ago here in Santa Barbara, California, just because I had this idea of, I wanted a community. I kind of thought, well, if it's something I want, then I'm sure other people could use that too. And the other part of that story, which I've told many times, but I can just quickly explain, is that I felt I was challenged by the idea of marketing myself. And I just thought, this is not yoga. To just be focused so much on how to make myself, just how to market myself and put myself out there. Me. It just didn't feel like yoga to me. To me, yoga is about service and caring for others. And I was really struggling with how to find that balance. And so I just felt that the conference was a way I could create a platform for other teachers who I admire or who are doing the work I admire. And for me as well. You know what I mean? I would create that platform for myself, basically, and to serve others. So that's how the conferences started. And then that's where the organization took off. And, the nonprofit took off. And from there, we've had, I don't know, probably, I think we've had 5 conferences now, or 6. I've lost track. And we have probably 600 ambassadors around the world. And
Okay, can you explain the ambassadors to me? Because I also noticed there's something to be on the network, and I was wondering if those were the same thing or different.
Yeah,
or
it's basically the same thing. So we're just about to relaunch the ambassador program, and to be more clear and easily understood. So basically, we're adding a membership component, and I don't know if we'll use the same name or not, but basically we're adding a membership component where people can support the nonprofit through like an annual membership fee. And they would get benefit for that. You would get like discounts on our conferences and stuff like that. But the ambassadors over the last few years, it's actually a free program just where we support yoga teachers who do this work. So the idea is that these are people who we want them to be connected with us, in a formal way. And we want to support their work. There are people that are bringing yoga to communities that don't usually have access. That's really the only requirement, that they're doing the work. And so it's a way of allowing people to use our name actually, and to help themselves in sharing yoga. And the ambassadors also have Facebook groups. So we do a lot through Facebook because it's actually a very accessible platform. Mm-hmm. And I think we have like 20 Facebook groups now, and there's like in 10 different languages. Wow. And so they're kind of regional groups where people can communicate like by language or by area where they live and find each other and support each other. Because the other thing is I feel like, my ultimate goal I think, is really to create an alternative to the more corporate yoga situation. I feel like those of us that work outside of that, who aren't necessarily teaching in studios only, and are really working on bringing yoga to people who don't have access to it. I think there needs to be another model to support them financially and kind of like an alternative economy for the rest of us.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how that's going to work yet, but somehow it will. Okay. I'm working on it.
I'm glad. No, it's a very interesting idea. I felt very isolated when I taught seniors because very few people at that time were, and there certainly wasn't anybody in the small town that I started in. And so I understand totally why you'd want to do that. So that's great. Okay, so you've got a nonprofit that has conferences and a group of people who are bringing yoga to populations that don't necessarily have much access. And you also, and I think this is very interesting, I talked to Hersha in Hong Kong a couple of weeks ago, and she was the first one that I'd never even, and I'm now ashamed of myself, but I had never even thought of people with disabilities teaching yoga. And so this is a really interesting idea that everybody can teach yoga as well as everybody can participate in yoga. And what do you make modifications in the teaching, or do you just give them a regular one over maybe a longer period of time? You said their bodies possibly couldn't do it as, in a really short period of time.
Well, the accessible yoga training changed. So maybe I'm confusing you because we started out that way. That was the original, the way accessible yoga was used was I offered a 200-hour, but I've only done that a few times because it actually is a very long program. It was a year long, and we had extra time built in with a lot of individual attention and support. And it was a great program. And actually, a lot of the graduates really were the ones who formed the nonprofit Accessible Yoga. They're still serving on our board and basically running Accessible Yoga. But the accessible yoga training now is mostly it's a short program that's mostly designed to help yoga teachers learn how to adapt their classes for people with disabilities. So that's not what we're doing anymore. Because I know some people do focus on bringing yoga teacher training to special populations, but that is the big challenge. And I think these days, those trainings are more like I know one of my trainers, actually, Amber Carnes, she's starting a 200-hour in Virginia that will focus on kind of accessible adaptive yoga within a 200-hour, but that's still a bit unusual. So the accessible yoga training, like the one that Hirsch is doing in Hong Kong and the one I teach all over the place, I think we'll probably have close to 30 trainings in the next 12 months, actually, of accessible yoga. They're short programs that really focus on just how to make yoga accessible. So how do you adapt asana? How do you adapt the other practices? And also, how do you teach multiple levels simultaneously? Because
Yes.
that's a skill that I think most teachers just have to figure out on their own,
Yeah.
and they don't have a lot of support.
Yeah, and
when
it's
you're out
difficult.
in the real world.
Yeah, I know. I've done that.
Yeah, right. And did anyone ever teach you how to do that?
No, it was it was pretty much I'll just figure this out, because after a while, you get quite good at your area, which is seniors, and a lot of them can't get down on the floor, and some of them want to get down on the floor. So you really do have to work that. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I focused on in the training. I mean, I've trained yoga. I've trained like yoga therapists, very long programs, but I'm really right now focusing on this shorter, accessible yoga training that's actually, I do it two ways, either as a 30-hour program or as a 21-hour with a short online component. And it's 3 or 4 days, and it's really focused on skill building. It's not like you go through and you like do this variation of this pose and this one of this. It's more like, here's are the skills you need to do what you just, to start out doing what you did, which is to go into a senior center and offer yoga. Like, what are the skills you need? And I think there's a lot of them. I mean, you need skills in learning how to adapt, which is different than just knowing all the different variations of a pose. There's actually skills to rethink the way we approach teaching asana. Think of it in a more collaborative and creative way, where you approach the practice more like possibilities. You can like teach a few different possibilities without kind of letting go of this kind of like classic version of a pose or advanced, and really just think here's different options. And then the other piece is, like I said, multiple levels, and really understanding as a teacher how to safely teach multiple levels so that people feel both, so that they're safe, and that they're getting served, so that you could have a student in a chair, like you said, and some on the mat. I love that. I love a class like that. That's my favorite. That's real. It's like real life, like real people.
It is real people. You're right. Yeah, but it is not easy. It takes, at least it took me some time. Now, I didn't have any training in it, which would have helped a lot, I think. Yeah, but I call them blended classes, and they are kind of, they're very challenging, I think.
Blended.
But
I like
that.
that.
Yeah. It's just what I found, and I don't know, we'll just go off into this, is that if you give a lot of options, I've noticed, and maybe it's also a psychological thing, I think, with older people, is they don't want to admit they can't do anything, that can't do something anymore. And so they often will take the hardest one, which is not what I would recommend, shall we say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's a skill in itself. It is dangerous.
Right.
And so it's a skill in itself to get people to really accept that they can do yoga, but it doesn't have to be, it can be done in a chair, it can be done against the wall, those kinds of things. So
right, exactly. And also that advanced isn't the most physically challenged. So I always emphasize things like advanced is where your mind is the most calm, or where you feel most relaxed. Like, that's the advanced in yoga. So I feel like that's like an example of how bringing the traditional or classical teachings of yoga in can actually help to make yoga more accessible. Because if we can teach students that, well, actually the most advanced yogi is the one who has a still, quiet mind, like, that changes the dynamic in the class, where it's like, oh, I thought the most advanced yogi was the gymnastic one.
Yeah.
And that's not
great.
true.
Yeah, great point. That's wonderful. I'll remember that.
Okay. Good.
Because it always worries me when people are doing something I think might be unsafe. So
yeah.
And then there's
right.
choice.
So it's like, can you breathe? It's like, actually, if you're not breathing, you're not doing yoga. So if you're not breathing comfortably in a relaxed way, and because what happens is people are straining, then you've gone too far. So it's like, I just try to bring up all these ways where you can really watch, like, are you actually doing yoga right now? Or are you doing some kind of calisthenics or gymnastics or exercise, which are all good things. Nothing wrong with them, but it's just not really what yoga is.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. Okay, so
you have to educate. Yeah.
If someone wanted to be an ambassador, what would you suggest that they do?
We have an application form on our website, so they can just go to accessibleyoga.org and go to the ambassador section and read about it and fill out the application.
Okay.
And like I said, in the next few weeks, we're going to be launching a new membership program, and I'm not sure what we're going to call them yet, but basically it's an opportunity to get even more involved And what we're going to ask of our members is that they make a donation or help us with fundraising, which is an option. And also they do some kind of action every year, some active bringing yoga into the world. So either teaching special accessible yoga workshops, or writing an article about accessible yoga, or podcast, or coming to a conference. Or coming to a conference, something, you know what I mean? Like they tell us what they do. So they'll have more demands, but they also will get benefits. Like I said, discounts and, training. We'll give like free webinars for our members, stuff like that. So we're trying to find a way to make the nonprofit sustainable, which is always a challenge.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. You have trainings that are 21 hours with some online parts, 30 hours, which I believe is face-to-face. You have the ambassador program, which is the same as, and then you have these networks that you put on Facebook with, what did you say? They're in 10 different languages, and they are kind of based geographically. So I know that there's an Accessible Yoga Australia, which is where I am right at the moment. So,
exactly.
Okay. So again, you've really pushed the community aspect of this. This is, you're not leaving people out on their own.
I think there's an important part, that goes along with that, and that is to get beyond the competitive nature of yoga teaching, because I think because of the way that yoga is structured right now, at least in the West, and how yoga teachers have to kind of fend for themselves to make a living, I think it's put us in a very competitive place with each other. And I'm really trying to get beyond that. My goal is to support yoga teachers. And the advice I always give to other yoga teachers, if they want to hear it, is to work on building networks themselves and collaborating with other yoga teachers and other professionals. That really, that's the way to build financially sustainable structures and income, is actually through collaboration and networking. And this whole like me, I can do it myself, that it just doesn't work. At least I don't think it works for me.
Didn't work for me.
Maybe it works. No, right. It didn't work for you? No. It leads to burnout often, or worse, where you just end up kind of struggling and frustrated, I think. And you could never, you'll never get there. If I don't know, to me, a competitive way of looking at the world means that there's never enough. And It also isn't really practicing yoga. That's what basically I'm just trying to do what I tell everyone else to do.
Well, that's good, though. I like that.
Practice what I preach.
That's right. Because so few people do.
Yeah, yoga is actually about learning to work with our minds, and a lot of that has to do with the ego. Because my ego is very strong, and I'm trying to work with it, not to make it weaker, but to actually use it as a force for good in the world, rather than evil. Good. Because we have a lot of power, each of us, we have a lot of power.
Yes. So we're almost at the end of our podcast. Okay. Is there anything that you would like to say to the listeners that we haven't covered, or you'd like to cover in a bit more detail?
We haven't really talked about our conferences, and I'll just say that I feel like they're just such amazing opportunities for this community building component that we're just talking about now. Mm-hmm. That for me, it becomes like a kind of extended family feeling, like a community that people that, I support and they support me. And it's just been such a gift to my life. And I would just recommend, if people are around near where we're offering them, that you try to come. And we offer lots of scholarships. We give over a quarter of the people attending scholarships. And, it's just a great way to, it's hard these days to get to something. Everything's online. But I'm really into face-to-face. Like, I like to do these conferences in person. I like to have my trainings in person, because I like to meet with people and to be in community with them. So we have, our next conference is actually October in Germany. And and then in the spring, at the end of May, we'll be in St. Louis, Missouri. And then next fall of 2019, we'll be in New York City. And I'm hoping to come to Australia someday. I've been invited down there to teach, so we'll see. Maybe I'll get down there.
Oh, well, good. We can meet up. That'd be great.
Yeah.
I want to give people your contact details, so that they can explore the website, which is www.accessibilityyoga.org. Or is it accessible?
Actually, accessible.
Accessible. Oh, okay.
Accessible yoga.
Accessible. Yes, it is. Sorry. I read that wrong.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Of course you know what your website is. It's early in the morning, guys. Come on. accessibleyoga.org. The Facebook, there's several of them. There's Accessible Yoga Project, and the A, the Y, and the P are capital. There's Accessible Yoga Training, all one word. And then there's a group, and I'll put that in the show notes because it's a lot of numbers, which I won't be helpful. Yeah. So again, you can look up on Facebook for accessible yoga groups. There's over 20 of them in 10 different languages, so that's very accessible. And the Instagram is Jivana108, accessible yoga training. So those two, or three probably.
Mm-hmm. 3, yeah.
Yeah. So if you are interested in this, it sounds like a wonderful thing, and I really, really commend you on the community aspect of it. I agree with you. I think it can be very lonely being a teacher, and it can kind of devolve into competitiveness, and that is not yoga, at least as I understand it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thanks for talking with me. It's a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.